And departmental officials, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on this meeting of the Standing Committee on Agriculture, Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. I do believe that we will be joined by Honorable Derek America, who has just sent me a message to say that he is struggling to connect. So I do hope that somebody would be able to assist him. I myself just experienced an internet interruption, so I'm glad I could rejoin. Also, honorable members, our main item on the agenda is a briefing by the Department of Environmental Affairs on the Western Cape Biodiversity Bill. But before I hand over to our departmental officials, I would just like the official responsible for liaising with the NCOP, Mr. Unati, to also just quickly brief us on the delays experienced by the NCOP. As you know, we were supposed to finalize our final mandate on some of the environmental legislation last Friday, and then the NCOP changed their program, and they met last week, and obviously we couldn't meet before we've received their final changes or proposed changes to the legislation. Perhaps Ms. Nikyark, if you could just give me an indication. Oh, I see Mr. Lasiti has joined us. Mr. Lasiti, please, if you could just quickly brief the committee before we move to our main agenda item, and then I'll give the members an opportunity to introduce themselves, as I believe we have now reached quorum numbers. Mr. Lasiti, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, members. I'll just provide a brief overview in terms of the National Forest Amendment Bill. Also, just before I speak on that, I also want to bring to the committee's attention that last week the NCOP met, the official, the administration, and all other legislatures. And the main focus or the objective of the meeting was based on grievance or complaints that emanate from committees, because committees would send out, in terms of the programs, to legislature short notice. Some committees wouldn't, they don't efficiently respond to legislatures. So that was discussed last week, and it has been forwarded to the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. In terms of, so once I get feedback, we'll probably get feedback in our next technical meeting. Once I get that, then through you, Chair, I'll be able to forward it to Ms. Neker, so that she can also be able to share the information in terms of what's the way forward and how is the NCOP planning to deal with the delays, etc. Now, in terms of the National Forest Amendment Bill, as you mentioned, Chair, there were two meetings. The first meeting was on the 1st of June. The second meeting was on the 8th of June. Now, on the 1st of June, the Select Committee dealt with the negotiating mandates from the following provinces: Eastern Cape, Free State, Gauteng, KZN, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Northern Cape. So all the proposed amendments from these provinces were agreed to, except from the KZN. None of the proposals from the KZN in terms of the amendments were agreed to. Gauteng, however, also did not have any proposed amendment, but the recommendations were then noted by the department. There were also no proposed amendments or recommendations from the Northern Cape. On the 8th of June, which was last week, which was the second meeting, they only dealt with two provincial mandates, which was the Northwest and the Western Cape. In terms of the Northwest, proposed amendments were agreed to. However, in terms of the Western Cape, none of the proposed amendments were agreed to. And the committee then has informed me, the procedural officer that side has informed, although it's not official, they've informed me that the final mandates meeting in terms of the NFA will be scheduled during the third term. They're even currently dealing now, as of today, with the National Environmental Management Laws Amendment Bill. It started today. They are now currently on the 8th, as we're speaking, they're now on the 8th province. I think now they're dealing with the Western Cape. So I'm predicting that will be done this week. However, in terms of final mandates, again, this will be scheduled during the third term. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairperson.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Lasiti. We appreciate that briefing. And you are free to leave if you believe so, if you wish. Honourable members, with that, I want to say welcome to you one and all again. And if I could just ask the honourable members to introduce themselves. My name is Hendrikus van der Westhuizen, Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Agriculture, Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. I've received one apology for today, and that is from Honourable Deirdre Baartman. And I believe that the Honourable America was so kind enough as to stand in for her. So, honourable members, can you just quickly introduce yourselves?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. My name is Matlodi Maseko, and good afternoon to everyone.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pat Maran, member of this committee.
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Derek America, and as the Chairperson indicated, I'm an alternate member of the committee and standing in for Honourable Baartman. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable members. Can I now ask?
Sorry. Chair, do you mind if I introduce myself?
No, I missed your name. Thank you. Please introduce yourself, Honourable.
Brett Heron. I'm a member of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that is the full list of those that have signed on. Then can I hand over to our parliamentary support staff just to introduce themselves as well?
Good afternoon, Chairperson, members and guests. Shireen Dikerk, Procedural Officer for this committee.
Yes, Advocate, you can go.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, Chair, and to the fellow members. My name is Romeo Master, Legal Advisor for the Provincial Parliament.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, good afternoon, members. My name is Temba Keswa, Manager, PEO. Thank you.
Thank you. And then you've also already, I think, heard the voice of Ms. Niekerk. And then we also have in support our ICT staff. Thank you very much. I think it's Mr. Shiraz Hassam that is doing duty in that regard. I also noticed, I think I did notice Mr. Vermeulen's name. Yes. Good. Thank you very much. And then I don't know if that is the full list. Ms. Niekerk, if you could just advise me, are there any other parliamentary support staff?
No, Chairperson, you covered everybody. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. And can I then hand over to the Department of Environmental Affairs officials? Ms. Shippey, are you going to go? Oh, sorry, Mr. Van Zyl. Welcome. And please introduce yourself and your team.
Chairperson, thank you very much. And this is, I think, a very important milestone for the journey that we've been traveling, both as a department in Cape Nature, but certainly also over the years in engaging with our standing committee. Let me first of all also just note an apology from Minister Anton Bredell. But present with me, I'm not going to have much to say. I'm just acknowledging your introduction on behalf of the administration. Apology also from Dr. Rosina Omar, who's on leave this week, but her team that have been working very closely with my own team in the department will be providing via Marlene Larosse at your invitation a high-level overview. This journey has, as I've noted, we've been traveling it for a while. Started off as two separate pieces of legislation, a draft Western Cape Environment Conservation Bill 2013, as well as an update and a draft Western Cape Nature Conservation Board Amendment Bill 2012. The Provincial Cabinet gave us permission to amalgamate the two pieces of legislation, and I think that was a trigger, as Marlene will elaborate on in a moment, to bring us to a very progressive approach, I would submit, in terms of the draft bill that is currently in front of you. Of course, this afternoon's engagement is less about the department and Cape Nature, but more about the parliamentary process that your standing committee will be navigating us forward, taking us towards the adoption, hopefully in the coming months, of this bill. I think the department also had a journey with the draft bill that we traveled with you with the LUPA Amendment Bill. And that process went off quite smoothly, and in retrospect, I think we are hoping to mimic some of that. But Chair, I'm going to hand over, with your permission, to Marlene to do the high-level overview of the draft bill, and then pretty much leave it with your committee to discuss how you are going to be managing the process moving forward, particularly in respect to public engagement. So with that, thank you from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Van Zyl. Before we have the presentation, can I just ask that Ms. Shippey also introduce the officials from her side, and then I believe that Mr. Ismail, Acting CEO for Cape Nature, may also be online. So first, over to you, Ms. Shippey.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, honourable members and guests online. Marlene LaRosse, as our HOD indicated, is my director for biodiversity and coastal management, and she will be taking you through the very long and detailed work that has been done on this bill. I'm just checking online. We also have Rudolf van Jaarsveld, our communications team member, and I know certainly from our .P team, someone who is working incredibly close with us, Lionel van der Schuyf. He's been absolutely invaluable to us during this process. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Shiraz Ismail to take you through the Cape Nature members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ismail.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Shippey. I'm Shiraz Ismail. I'm acting CEO for Cape Nature in the absence of Dr. Razina Umar. And the Cape Nature team that's here today, we have Mr. Barry Barnes, who is head of our legal services. And then we also have the executive director, who was very closely involved with this process, Carl Burse, that is joining us. And that's the Cape Nature team, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable members, officials, are there anybody else that would like also to just announce their presence? None at this stage? Good. So with that then, can I then hand over to Ms. LaRosse to present to us this bill. Thank you very much, Ms. LaRosse. Looking forward to your presentation. Thank you. If you can put that into presentation mode. Excellent. Thank you. I think you're good to go.
Thank you, Chair, and honourable members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. Just double checking whether you can see my presentation.
We hear you well and we see your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to represent the bill to you today, and I want to emphasize that this is really a team effort that is the results of which are being presented to you today. I want to acknowledge our colleagues in the Department of the Premier's Legal Services, specifically Mr. Lionel van der Schuyf, as well as my colleague in Cape Nature, who's been formed part of the vetting team, Ms. Carl Burse. So while I'm speaking, this is our joint effort between the department and Cape Nature, and of course bringing in a number of comments and perspectives that we have already received in the process of advertising the bill previously. By way of introduction, Honourable Chair, I want to just remind all of us that the Western Cape province is endowed with world-renowned biodiversity and natural resources. Together with our unparalleled endowment comes very important and significant international responsibilities, as well as opportunities for our people and our biodiversity economy. As you know, our province is home to the Cape Floristic region, the smallest and most diverse of the 6 global floral kingdoms, and one of the 34 globally recognized biodiversity hotspots. We also have about 31% of the succulent karoo, another global biodiversity hotspot within our province. Our ecosystem goods and services in our provinces, as we've presented to you on the 1st of June on ecological infrastructure, is the foundation of our economy in the Western Cape and necessary for our inclusive economic growth and sustainable delivery of basic services. Our dependence on ecosystem services, including but not limited to water resources, highlights the need which people have to ensure the long-term ecological resilience which underpins those ecosystem services. And I think in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, this has emphasized our dependence of human well-being and a sustainable economy on natural systems that provides for these critical resources. Chair, I also want to highlight that within the process and in putting forward this legislation, it's the province's prerogative and also a requirement to put into effect the rights which are found in Section 24 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. 1996, our Constitution, to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations through reasonable legislative and other measures that promote conservation and secure ecologically sustainable development and use of natural resources while promoting justifiable economic and social development. And with that, honourable members, I want to take us into the background of the presentation. This will be the overview of the presentation. I'm going to speak to how we got where we are today, the objects of the bill, the contents of the bill, the impact of the bill, and key stakeholders that are involved in this process, as requested in the briefing letter we received from the chairperson. By way of background, the biodiversity and protected areas of our province are currently regulated in terms of the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act of 2004, NEMBA, the National Environmental Management Protected Areas Act 2003, NEMPA, as it's known, and the Western Cape Nature Conservation Board Act of 1998 and the Nature Conservation Ordinance of 1974, known as the Ordinance, in order to seek alignment with national legislative frameworks and to rationalize and modernize provincial legislative frameworks for biodiversity management. A process of legislative reform has been ongoing since 2012. As my HOD pointed out, in April 2014, Provincial Cabinet granted approval to amalgamate the draft Western Cape Nature Conservation Board Amendment Bill, at that point it was at 2012, and the draft Western Cape Environment Conservation Bill of 2013 into one consolidated bill. A first draft amalgamated bill was produced by March 2015. At that point, the department recognized the need to move beyond amalgamation and to allow for further modernization and alignment and innovation into a framework bill. At that point, Cape Nature, as the public entity for nature conservation, also required urgent review of the ordinance in order to align with the objects of NEMBA, and also the need to respond to a strategic framework to guide the process of the development of the bill further. And in this regard, the Provincial Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, the plan that aligns our achievements to national and international obligations, provided that strategic framework. Further, our view at that point was also to incorporate the Biosphere Reserves Act and its proposed amendments into the bill. As a result, a revised bill was then produced and submitted to legal services in March 2016 for vetting. And the vetting team, made up of our Department of the Premier and Cape Nature, then concluded a revised draft by December 2018 that was workshopped internally, comments within Cape Nature executive team and board, and within our own senior management team. After further iterations, we then produced a revised draft, which was then forwarded under submission to Provincial Cabinet to request the publication of the draft bill, which happened in 2018, on the basis of the content being settled by the State Law Advisor. The draft Western Cape Biodiversity Bill was then published for comment on the 7th of May 2019 for a 60-day comment period. It being of substantial length, we decided to ensure that a longer period was provided. Thereafter, however, we did receive requests for extension for the comment period, and such extension notice was then published on the 5th of July, extending the comment period to the 7th of August 2019. We received comments from 186 commentators, and amendments were then made on the basis of those comments. The vetting process then finalized the draft bill amendments, which were then translated into Afrikaans and isiXhosa. The bill and the memo on objects were then also certified by legal services, and Cabinet approved introduction into Parliament on the 1st of December 2020. Minister Bedell then submitted the bill to the Speaker on the 22nd of December 2020. The parliamentary language practitioners reviewed and edited the bill, and it is then published by Parliament for comment the 10th of May, closing comments by the 7th of June. On the 9th of June, Honourable Chair, the bill was then referred to the Standing Committee, and we were then requested to provide such briefing to yourselves. The objects of the bill are critical as it underpins the legislation in its entirety. The Western Cape Biodiversity Bill, the bill is primarily intended to replace the Western Cape Nature Conservation Board Act of '98 and the Ordinance. Both of these statutes predate the Constitution, and they do not adequately provide mechanisms that can conserve and manage biodiversity and ecological infrastructure to ensure that ecosystems support an inclusive and resilient economy. We will also need to align to superordinate legal frameworks, including NEMBA and NEMPA, as mentioned before, but also to be able to enable a robust but also dynamic framework to respond to the threats to biodiversity. The bill thus also incorporates a rationalised approach to the Western Cape Biosphere Reserves Act and its proposed amendments, and this will also enable the repeal of that legislation. The bill will also repeal the assigned provisions of the Mountain Catchment Areas Act of 1970 and thereby modernise the protection of mountain catchment areas, which themselves house important ecosystems and deliver essential water provisioning services to the province. Honourable Chair, I'm going to take us into the details of the objects of the bill. As set out in the bill, the objects of the bill are to give effect to the obligation of the state in terms of national legislation to act as a trustee in relation to the environment, to give effect to Section 81M of the Western Cape Constitution, to protect and conserve the environment in the province, including its unique biodiversity for the benefit of present and future generations, to ensure the long-term ecological sustainability and resilience of biodiversity, ecosystems, ecosystem services, and ecological infrastructure through implementation of the principles of ecological sustainability, which are set out in Clause 6 of the bill, and the protection of priority biodiversity and ecological infrastructure. To ensure human well-being and the long-term resilience of society and the economy through the conservation of protected areas, biodiversity, ecosystems, ecosystem services, and ecological infrastructure. To enable reasonable and sustainable access to benefits and opportunities emanating from the conservation of protected areas, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and ecological infrastructure. And enable to establish institutional structures and organizational capacity for the effective discharging of conservation and management of biodiversity and nature in the province. Further, to promote consultation, cooperation, integrated planning, decision-making, and management in support of the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services in the province, to promote systematic biodiversity planning and the attainment of the biodiversity targets for conservation set in the Biodiversity Spatial Plan and the Provincial Protected Areas Expansion Strategy, to regulate certain activities to be undertaken in a manner that enhances and protects the integrity and health of the environment, subject to Section 231 of the Constitution, to implement and give effect to the international agreements and best practices pertaining to the environment and conservation of biodiversity, to enable the financial and economic sustainability of the relevant institutions responsible for the conservation and management of biodiversity and nature conservation in the province, and to enable and develop an equitable and sustainable biodiversity economy in the province, including the promotion and development of ecotourism in areas under the control of Cape Nature. Honourable Chair, I'm going to take you on an overview of the contents of the bill and then go into a little bit more detail on the various chapters. In the overview, just to present the contents, there is a preamble, which I haven't referred to on this particular slide, but it's very important to look at the preamble in terms of the context and setting the scene for the bill. I have outlined some of those areas in my introduction. The long title for the bill is to provide for the framework and institutions for nature conservation and the protection, management, and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystems in the province, and for matters incidental thereto. Chapter 1 deals with the interpretation, objectives, and application of the bill. Chapter 2, duties and principles. Chapter 3, administration. Chapter 4, Cape Nature, its establishment, its board, its operating procedures, administration of Cape Nature, financial matters, and also dissolution of board or Cape Nature. Chapter 5, biodiversity planning and monitoring. Chapter 6, protected areas, mountain catchment areas, biodiversity stewardship and biosphere reserves. Chapter 7, protection of ecosystems, ecological infrastructure and species. Chapter 8, authorization. Chapter 9, compliance and enforcement. Chapter 10, offences and penalties. Chapter 11, appeals. Chapter 12, general and transitional provisions. And then, of course, in the schedule, the repeal of laws. Under the different sections, specifically under Chapter 1, interpretation, objectives and applications of the Act, Clause 1 provides for definitions of words and terms used in the bill, a very important part of the bill. Clause 2 provides for the objectives of the bill, which I have just covered with you. Clause 3 provides for the application of the bill. And Clause 4 provides for provisions to resolve conflict between the provisions of the bill and other legislation. Under Chapter 2, duties and principles, Clause 5 provides for the duties of the state in managing biodiversity, and Chapter 6 provides for principles of ecological sustainability that must be applied by organs of state when making decisions or taking actions that may affect biodiversity within the province. Honourable Chair, I'm going to take us into Clause 6 and elaborate on the principles of ecological sustainability. Every organ of state whose decisions or actions may affect biodiversity or the environment in the province must apply the principles of ecological sustainability, which are to take account of the benefits and intrinsic and use value of natural resources and ecosystems, to ensure that biodiversity and ecosystems are protected, maintained, rehabilitated in a manner that enables the attainment of targets for conservation set by the province, to promote the resilience of biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecological infrastructure, to ensure that development does not undermine the long-term persistence and resilience of biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecological infrastructure, to ensure that conservation and resilience of biodiversity for the benefit of present and future generations are given priority over the interests of any member or members of any community, to avoid or, where they cannot altogether be avoided, minimize and remedy the disturbance of ecosystems and loss of biological diversity, to ensure that indigenous biological resources are used in a manner that is ecologically sustainable, and also takes into account the well-being of any faunal resource that is involved. And finally, to ensure that a risk-averse and cautious approach is applied, so that where there is insufficient evidence that an activity will not cause a long-term adverse effect, it should be avoided. Moving on to Chapter 3, Administration. Clause 7 provides for the functions of the Provincial Minister, which include exercising oversight over the Head of Department, Cape Nature, and the Board of Cape Nature, developing and implementing provincial policy, and periodically evaluating the effectiveness of the implementation and enforcement of this bill. Clause 8 provides for the duties of the Head of Department, which include advising Provincial Minister, after consultation with Cape Nature, on matters of law, subordinate legislation, and provincial policy regarding nature conservation, biodiversity, and coastal and estuarine management, coordinating provincial strategies as approved by the Provincial Minister for Nature Conservation, Biodiversity, and Coastal and Estuarine Management, and promoting and developing the biodiversity economy. Furthermore, the Head of Department has duties that he or she must fulfill in terms of Clause 8, which are consistent with his or her duties as the accounting officer for the department and for Vote 9. Chapter 4 deals with Cape Nature, and the chapter is divided into the following 6 parts. Part 1 speaks specifically to the establishment, functions, and powers of Cape Nature, clauses 9 to 11. Clause 9 providing for the continued existence of current Western Cape Nature Conservation Board and for it to be known as Cape Nature. Part 2, composition and membership of the board, that is from clauses 12 to 22. Part 3, operating procedures of the board, that's clauses 23 to 26. Administration of Cape Nature, from clause 27. Part 5, financial matters, from clauses 28 to 31. And Part 6, dissolution of the board or Cape Nature, clauses 32 to 33. Chapter 5, biodiversity planning and monitoring. Clause 34 provides for the publication of the biodiversity spatial plan for the province. And Clause 35 provides for the purpose of that plan, including the identification of biodiversity priority areas. Clause 36 provides for the content of that biodiversity spatial plan. And Clause 37 provides for the use and application of the biodiversity spatial plan, including its alignment with other plans provided for in national and provincial legislation. Clause 38 provides for review of the biodiversity spatial plan every 5 years. Chapter 6, which deals with protected areas, mountain catchment areas, biodiversity stewardship, and biosphere reserves, it is also divided into 4 parts, which cover 4 mechanisms which may provide protection to various areas. In this chapter, we are repealing areas of the Mountain Catchment Areas Act and the Western Cape Biosphere Reserves Act. Under Part 1, expansion of protected areas, Clause 39 provides for the Provincial Protected Areas Expansion Strategy, and this strategy will be drafted and adopted and published in order to promote systematic biodiversity planning and the attainment of the biodiversity targets for conservation, which are set out in the Biodiversity Spatial Plan and the Provincial Protected Areas Expansion Strategy. Under Part 2, Mountain Catchment Areas, Clauses 40 and 41 provide for the declaration and management of mountain catchment areas where such declaration is required for sustaining the provision of ecosystem services, particularly water provisioning. Part 3, biodiversity stewardship. Under Clause 42, we provide for biodiversity stewardship whereby a landowner may enter into a biodiversity stewardship agreement which serves to further the objectives of the Provincial Protected Areas Expansion Strategy. And then Part 4, biosphere reserves, clauses 43 to 46 provide for the application for UNESCO designation of biosphere reserves, the management of biosphere reserves, the Biosphere Reserve Framework Plan, and the funding of such biosphere reserves. In Chapter 7, which deals with the protection of ecosystems, ecological infrastructure and species. Clause 47 empowers the provincial minister to identify an ecosystem or part thereof, or an area of ecological infrastructure, as in need of special protection to ensure the maintenance of its ecological integrity or the delivery of ecosystem services. Clause 48 empowers the provincial minister to prescribe requirements and publish guidelines for biodiversity offsets or other mitigation measures in the province. Clause 49 provides for the publication of restricted activities or restricted methods in respect of any listed species or any category of listed species. Chapter 8 provides for authorization under clauses 50 to 55 for how to apply for an authorization, the decisions on such application, the review, suspension, withdrawal, and amendment of authorization. Chapter 9, compliance and enforcement, also undertaken in two parts. Part 1, compliance and enforcement officials in judicial matters, clauses 56 to 68, provide for the designation of nature conservation officers, nature conservation rangers, and honorary nature conservation officers, and sets out the respective mandates, functions, and powers. The powers provided in this chapter are both necessary and appropriate for the effective combating of crimes relating to biodiversity. Part 2, administrative enforcement mechanisms and penalties. Clauses 69 to 71 contain an administrative enforcement tool to supplement criminal enforcement tools which may be used in terms of this bill. In Chapter 10, Offences and Penalties, Clause 72 provides for offences that are categorized according to degree of severity, with Clause 73 providing for maximum penalties for each category of offence that will enable a court to impose an appropriate sentence on offenders in terms of the bill. Clause 47 provides for the cancellation of an authorization if a person is convicted of a crime. Clause 75 provides for the award of costs. And 76 provides for the forfeiture of any specimen or item involved in an offence and that was seized in terms of the bill. Chapter 11 provides for appeals, Clause 77 providing for the appeals against decisions by Cape Nature officials, and Clause 78 providing for appeals against decisions by the Chief Executive Officer of Cape Nature or a person acting under delegation by the Provincial Minister. Honourable Chair, Chapter 12 deals with general and transitional provisions, Clauses 79 to 89, providing for general and transitional provisions for the effective implementation of the bill, and Clause 81 providing for regulations to be made by the Provincial Minister to enable the practical implementation of the bill. The last slide then in terms of the content deals with the schedule in terms of the repeals of legislation. This bill will repeal Seashore Act of 1935, the whole of the Act, the Mountain Catchment Areas Act of 1970, the whole only insofar as it has been assigned to the province by Proclamation R28 of 1995, the whole of the Nature Conservation Ordinance of 1975, the whole of Nature Reserves Validation Ordinance of 1982, the whole of the Western Cape Nature Conservation Board Act of 1998, the whole of the Western Cape Nature and Environmental Conservation Ordinance Amendment Act of 1999, and the whole, excluding Section 2 and Schedule 2 of the Western Cape Nature Conservation Laws Amendment Act of 2000. And then, as I've mentioned, the whole of the Western Cape Biosphere Reserves Act of 2011. The impacts of the bill. Honourable Chair, as we've mentioned earlier, we have tried to, insofar as possible and necessary, to enable articulation with other legislation, national legislation, and provincial legislation, specifically the articulation with the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act, the Land Use Planning Act of the Western Cape, the National Environmental Management Integrated Coastal Management Act, as well as the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act. The bill adopts a value-based, resilience-focused, future-proofed framework to proactively address threats to biodiversity. As I've mentioned, the current protection afforded by legislation that currently exists is insufficient to conserve biodiversity in the province. The ordinance being enacted prior to the Constitution, also not necessarily bringing into relief the amendments and changes that have been introduced in national legislation. But importantly to note that there's been a shift away from a regulatory policing approach in biodiversity management in favor of more forward-looking protection of habitats in which these species is a shared responsibility of the state landowners and beneficiaries. In so doing, we are aligning to both international, national, and frameworks, but specifically enabling the advantages of subsidiarity. In other words, enabling contextually relevant approaches within the Western Cape Biodiversity Bill. Critical impact of the bill will also be to enable the biodiversity green and blue economies, to also enable the rationalization of regulation for the sustainable use industry, and also to provide enabling frameworks for landowners and other authorities to manage biodiversity in productive and urban landscapes. In focusing on who the key affected stakeholders are, Honourable Chair, as I've mentioned in my introduction, with our globally significant responsibility, key stakeholders are the global community, people of South Africa, and the Western Cape. Government departments and entities at all spheres, specifically local government, regulated communities who are entrained for sustainable use, natural resource user groups of all shapes and descriptions, the agricultural sector, a major partner in the process, non-government organizations and community organizations, landscape initiatives, the biosphere reserves, of which there are 5 in the Western Cape, private landowners, and other partners in the landscape. Honourable Chair, with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Good. Thank you very much, Ms. LaRose. Can I just ask, is there anybody, particularly from the Department or Cape Nature, who would like to add anything to this presentation? I do not see any hands. Good. Then thank you very much, Ms. LaRose. I think you've done excellently to take us through quite an extensive piece of legislation. Obviously, honourable members, we will have to delve into the detail of this. But if there are any questions at this stage to Ms. LaRose or any of the other officials, please indicate your intent by raising your hand or using the raising hand function on MS Teams. Are there any questions in this regard? I do not happen to see any hands at this stage. Good. Then thank you again, Ms. LaRose and Mr. Van Zyl, you and your team under your leadership. I think the one message that I take away from this is that this was really a long and intensive exercise that you embarked upon. And I trust that this will serve the environment well, but then also all the role players and that by bringing together quite a number of pieces of legislation, some being quite old and probably outdated pieces of legislation, I think the task of everyone would be made easier once adopted. Now, honourable members, the next step is then obviously also for us as members of this committee to embark on a public participation process, and for us to then give the public an indication or an opportunity to submit their comments to us as members of the standing committee on the bill as presented and as published in the Provincial Gazette. I do see, Honourable Maran, your microphone seems to be on from time to time. Would you like to address us?
Maybe it's someone somewhere who's controlling my mic. Good afternoon, everyone. But let me ask this question, Chair. This bill, Chair, because I'd like to understand where does it place Cape Nature? Because it seems there's a shift away from Cape Nature to maybe a specific office in terms of decision making. I just wanted to check, where does it place Cape Nature and the role that they have played in this particular bill, whether they are satisfied or not, but it just seems that there's a shift. Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Maran. I still don't see any other hands, so please, Ms. LaRose, are you going to respond, or would you like to direct this?
I'm happy to respond. Thank you very much for the question. The impact is to effectively consolidate the position of Cape Nature as the entity for nature conservation in the province. It provides for the relevant roles and responsibilities of the different institutions for environment, nature conservation in the province, and in fact strengthens Cape Nature's role and position in terms of the modernization and the clarification of roles and responsibilities. So to answer the question directly, the intention is to really strengthen the role of Cape Nature in its role, not just in terms of protected areas, but in terms of its role outside in the landscape in the province. So in fact, it's an expression of a change and a modernization in terms of the approach of conservation organizations in both internationally and in the country, and in so doing, I believe consolidates that role of Cape Nature within the province. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaRose. And then can I just ask, if you say that it's strengthening the role of Cape Nature, will there be any staff affected by this bill should it be accepted? And if not, how can we expect of Cape Nature to now play a stronger role without them receiving the necessary resources? Or does that mean that this bill will have some financial implications for us as a province as well?
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Indeed, what has happened as a consequence of the bill is that there's been a very detailed process of undertaking a service delivery model analysis within the biodiversity and coastal management mandates within the province, which is between Cape Nature and the department, and that is effectively enabled a certain process of organizational change within both the department and Cape Nature. Cape Nature's been more fleet of foot and has already moved into the space of its reorganization. And the issue here, Honourable Chair, is that in the process of modernization, there's less of a focus on the command and control style of nature conservation as it was at the time of the ordinance into a more modernized approach, which should reduce certain administrative burdens for the organization, but also enable, as it has, the retooling and the reorientation of the organization into the modern context. In other words, the operation across the landscape and across the coastal landscapes, estuarine landscapes as well. So if I think I've answered your question, Honourable Chair, it's effectively taken up already within Cape Nature's organisation, and the roles and responsibilities that are set out within the bill are already those roles and responsibilities that are currently in operation between the department and Cape Nature. Thank you.
Thank you, and I recognise the hand of Honourable Heron.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I was interested in the biodiversity spatial plan. So this legislation, as I understand it, is introducing a biodiversity spatial plan, or does one already exist? And how does the biodiversity spatial plan integrate with the spatial development frameworks of municipalities and a municipality's right to determine its spatial development objectives and priorities? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Heron, and I'm really glad to hear that you're sounding well. Ms. LaRose, can I just go back and please park that question of Honourable Heron, please note it. The one aspect that I'm concerned about is the danger of some duplication of responsibilities between Cape Nature and the department. If you could just perhaps clarify, where would things such as law enforcement regarding biodiversity or protected species and so on, where would that rest, and have there been any attempts to try and eliminate potential duplication of responsibilities between that of the department and Cape Nature, and where do you distinguish between the two? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Indeed, in the service delivery model engagement, that was indeed the objective, to ensure that there is no duplication and to ensure that there are also no gaps in the implementation and the discharge of the mandate. And so that exercise was undertaken in our respective organizational design reviews that has been ongoing for the last 2.5 years, being informed specifically by our superordinate legislation, but also the draft bill at that point. And so I can assure you that there is no duplication. There's simply no luxury for duplication in our space. As you know, we are living and operating in resource-constrained environment. On the issue of law enforcement, in terms of the green scorpions, the biodiversity legislation specifically, insofar as specific acts and regulations have been delegated for implementation to Cape Nature, Cape Nature has the exclusive responsibility to implement such enforcement. However, in other areas, for example, in environmental enforcement, for example, under Section 24 of NEMA, I'll use an example of activities commencing without relevant authorization. Here we work together as a team. Our functions, Honourable Chair, are interrelated. You cannot hermetically seal off these different functions. Our minister has instructed that we need to work in an interrelated way, and so in terms of the whole green scorpion cadre, we work as an integrated team. However, there are exclusive domains of enforcement which Cape Nature itself has the assigned responsibility for. Thank you.
And in terms of Honourable Heron's question, I don't know if that's been dealt with sufficiently.
Honourable van der Westhuizen, and I will answer Honourable Heron's question. Honourable Heron, yes, we do currently have a Western Cape biodiversity spatial plan. It has not been adopted in terms of the bill because the bill is obviously still to be assented to. And that current biodiversity spatial plan provides a really important informant in terms of local government spatial development frameworks. So under the relevant chapter, chapter 5, and I specifically point Honourable Heron to clauses 37, where you can really look at detail as to how the biodiversity spatial plan will be used and how it needs to be taken into account in the development of any plans made in terms of the Municipal Systems Act, plans made in terms of the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act, and of course also the Western Cape Land Use Planning Act. So it provides for a critical informant into those exclusive domains of municipal planning. Thank you very much.
Can I give then first an opportunity to Honourable Heron because it might be a follow-up?
No problem.
Thank you, Chair. It is a sort of follow-up, but I also had a new question. I have read section 37 and I see it makes reference to the Systems Act and SPLUMA and LUPA, but I haven't read those sections of SPLUMA, LUPA and the Systems Act for the purposes of this question. But are those sections, do those sections in those three pieces of legislation allow for the provincial, by a provincial spatial plan to guide decision making in local government spatial framework? So do those three pieces of legislation allow for a provincial plan to influence and enforce a provincial plan on a local government? So that's my follow-up question. And if I may just add my new question, does this is this legislation in any way affected by what happens with the future of the Environmental Commissioner? I mean, there are proposals for the Environmental Commissioner to be removed from the Western Cape Constitution, but how does this legislation deal with the fact that that may not happen, and how does the Environmental Commissioner then fulfill their role if one is ultimately appointed? Thank you.
Thank you. And before you respond, Ms. LaRose, I do know that Honourable Maran may have to leave early. So Honourable Maran, if I can give you an opportunity to pose your question now.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Not necessarily a question, more a comment, because listening to the responses, it seems that, and specifically when one says that there will be no duplications of mandates, it seems that some of the mandates will be taken away from Cape Nature. It's a give and take. Will be taken away, and on the other hand, basically for them not to complain, is that the mandates that they currently have, some of those will be strengthened. So the two that will remain, or the three that will remain, we will strengthen them, but on the other hand, we will take away another three. It seems, Chair, if you listen to the issue of duplicates of mandates, that some of the mandates will definitely be taken away from Cape Nature.
Over to you, Ms. LaRose.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Do I respond to Honourable Moran's question first or Honourable Heron's question first?
Honourable Moran.
Was not a question, was a comment.
Correct. So please, Ms. LaRose, you can respond to Honourable Heron's, and if you believe that that comment by Honourable Maran requires a response from your side, then obviously you are welcome to do so. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Perhaps it is important just to respond to Honourable Moran, and I note the concerns, and I want to assure Honourable Moran that there is no dilution of the conservation mandate that Cape Nature currently carries. That is absolutely not the intention of the bill. However, in the context of the requirements of public entities and performance management in entities, but also to bring coherence on the issues of coastal and estuarine management. Honourable Moran may know that the department is the lead agency responsible for coastal management in the province, and that is a role and responsibility which we are sharing now with Cape Nature to a greater degree in terms of how estuaries are managed. And so there's a consolidation and a clarity of mandate that has actually, I would say, solidified and definitely not eroded any mandate of Cape Nature in that process. Moving on to the issues related to Honourable Heron's comment. In terms of the Municipal Systems Act and the other pieces of legislation, local government is required to take into account sector plans as well as plans which are the domain of the provincial mandate. And it's clarified within those various subsections that it's an important aspect of our compliance of SDFs when we review SDFs to enable alignment to, for example, a sector plan, in this case, the Biodiversity Spatial Plan. Thank you very much. I believe I will leave the question in relation to the Environmental Commissioner to my HOD, if I may. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Please proceed, Mr. Van Zyl.
Chairperson, thank you. I think I would respond to the new question by Member Heron and say that the matter of the Commissioner for the Environment is something that is currently within the ambit of the Western Cape Constitution Act. And obviously, as the members will know, the subject of the Western Cape Constitution Amendment Bill, which is currently in public participation process by Parliament. So regardless of the outcome of that process, this Western Cape Biodiversity Bill does not and was never planned to in any way deal with the subject matter and roles and responsibilities of a Commissioner for the Environment. The current process in terms of the amendment bill would need to go its course and have an ultimate outcome, whatever that might be. Should the decision ultimately be not to amend, and therefore that the provision for a Commissioner for the Environment is retained, then I believe the legal process would follow a similar one as that which was followed for the Commissioner for Children. In other words, a separate law reform enablement process for the Commissioner for the Environment would follow in due course once the constitutional matter has been resolved. So certainly, whatever that outcome is, it's not affected by or predicated upon in terms of the subject matter of the Western Cape Biodiversity Bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Zyl, for that. Honourable members, I don't see any further hands.
Chair, just before I leave.
Yes.
Chair, look, the response, Chair, in terms of whether some of the mandates will be affected from Cape Nature. And the response that I get basically, especially when it comes to coastal management, is basically to say that from the department side to Cape Nature is to say, look, we are not going to kick you out of the car, but get it into the back seat and let us take the driving wheel. So they are saying to us that Cape Nature will still play its role, but the department will play a leading role, meaning the mandate basically will be curbed in a way. Thanks very much. Can I be excused, Chair?
Thank you, Honourable Heron. Thank you very much for attending this meeting this far. I do notice the hand of Ms. Shippey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to respond to the comment that's just been made, our provincial department is already the lead for coastal management. That is under NAMICMA, which is the Integrated Coastal Management Act. This is not something that is happening because of this bill. It is really being unpacked in the bill to understand where things sit, but the actual leadership position is from that national legislation already. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Shippey. Honourable members, we will certainly be discussing this legislation page by page going forward. The next item that we need to decide on is how will we inform and invite the members of the public to play their role in terms of the public participation process. Now, I've been asked by our procedural officer to read into the record some of constitutional requirements in terms of the public participation process. And I don't know if our officials from the Department of Cape Nature would like to stay online. If you want to leave the meeting now, you're welcome. And I want to say thank you very much for your attendance. Again, thank you for the hard work that you've put in up to now. And we will certainly be making use of your knowledge and your experience a lot going forward in clarifying for us, also the input from the public to help us in our understanding of the implications of some of those comments, etc. So thank you very much. And with that, we are now going to move then to the next item on the agenda. And that, as I've said, is in terms of our advertisements, etc. I've been asked to then read into the record the following. The preamble of the Constitution lays the foundations of a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people. In order to build on these foundations, the Constitution places duties on the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces, and provincial legislatures. Section 118(1)(a) of the Constitution stipulates that the provincial legislature must facilitate public involvement in the legislative and other processes of the legislature and its committees. There's just an obligation on the legislature to facilitate public involvement in the legislative or lawmaking process. The extent to which this constitutional obligation must be fulfilled is, however, left to the discretion of a provincial legislature. Section 1161 of the Constitution stipulates as follows. A provincial legislature may determine and control its internal arrangements, proceedings and procedures, may make rules and orders concerning its business with due regard to representative and participatory democracy, accountability, transparency and public involvement. And determining factors for public participation include, and I jump, nature and importance of the legislation, intensity and impact on the public, time and expense of conducting public hearings, what did the Parliament or a provincial legislature consider to be appropriate public involvement in the light of the legislation's content, importance and urgency. And the committee, after this briefing, should now be equipped to decide on the extent of public participation that is needed. Now, honourable members, in the past, this process has entailed a number of options. For example, a call for written submissions via an advertisement, submissions which nowadays could be submitted via email, or oral submissions via, for example, WhatsApp. Then written submissions and also oral submissions should we decide to embark on public hearings, and then obviously a combination of the above or some of the above as we see fit. Okay, so in the past we've paid for advertisements in the print media, and I've asked Ms. Nikak to prepare for us a list of the print media that has been used in the past, as well as the cost implications. You may just know, honourable members, that in terms of the Provincial Parliament's budget, we have been asked to, and we're actually required to cut back on our expenditure in line with the requests from the National Fiscus. So I think we need to achieve or aim to achieve our goals with taking the costs into consideration as well. And then, honourable members, I think we've all noted that there's been a very strong upturn and upswing in terms of the use of social media. And for that, I can just remind you that the WCPP has already got accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and that the bill has already been publicized on the Western Cape Provincial Parliament's website. Then in the past, we've also sent specific letters to stakeholders, just also drawing their attention to the opportunity for comments. And obviously, the Western Cape Provincial Parliament's already built up a record with a list of stakeholders that in the past have indicated that they have an interest in the topic at hand. And then normally members are also welcome to forward the names of specific stakeholders to the procedural officer. And then obviously we've got the public education and outreach section, we've got the research section, and then obviously we also have our legal advisors that can also play a role in terms of helping us to digest the inputs from the public in this regard. Good. So, honourable members, with that, perhaps I can just ask Ms. Nikak to beam onto our screens the names of various print media and the costs that have been incurred in the recent past. And with that, honourable members, I want to give you an opportunity now to advise us, taking into account that unfortunately there are some budgetary constraints in terms of inviting the public or informing the public of the opportunity to comment. Honourable members, anybody that would like to respond, please? None at this stage, as far as I can see. Thank you. Then, honourable members, just to open the floor, so to say, I believe that this piece of legislation is extremely important, and that we should and it affects everybody in the province, and therefore I would propose that we support those publications that have really got a wide readership over the length and breadth of our province. And I do know that, you know, we've had the big three in the past, the Burger Cape Times and the Weekend Argus, which you see listed there at the top. But I do know that something such as the Son is also widely read by a slightly different section of our residents. And then I think that some of you may be able to advise me on a newspaper which is called, now it slipped my mind, I think it's The Voice. Honourable members, any comment from your side, if we perhaps should go with advertisements in those newspapers? Okay, if there's no comment, I would like to accept that that means that there's general support for that. Then in terms of social media, Ms. Nikak, perhaps you can just advise us. I believe there's very little in terms of additional cost to be incurred. If we do ask that the opportunity to comment also be included or be referred to in terms of the 3 social media platforms that I've already mentioned. If you could just help me.
You are correct, Chairperson. Our Instagram, Twitter account, Facebook, that's all free of charge, and call for submissions on the bill will be made on those platforms. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. And then the form of the submissions, could we again cover the full spectrum, that being first, written comments via return email, written comments via mail. I don't know if that option is still available for those that don't have access to email. And then also in the past, we've allowed voice messages on WhatsApp. It wasn't widely used in the past, but I think it may assist some people that may want to comment on. Would those options still be available?
Those options are certainly available, Chairperson. Yes, thank you.
Good. Thank you, honourable members. And now you must please help me. I think what we've seen is that there were really a lot of parties that showed an interest and commented on this bill in its draft form when published by the department. I think the figure was about 170 of those entities and individuals that responded. We will probably have to consider the possibility of public hearings as well. And my question is, shall we first see what the response in general are on this advertisements and then decide on the need for public hearings? Or would you like to express a view on the possibility of public hearings now already? And I think we must also take into account that public hearings in this time of COVID might not require of people to travel to certain destinations, but that it might also be run then in the form of either Microsoft Teams meetings or perhaps even hybrid meetings, where we allow people to meet and make use of facilities in various regions of the province, but that they then communicate with us via an online platform. Again, honourable members, if there's nobody that feels strongly at this point that we must at this stage already schedule public hearings, then I take it that you are happy for us to first test the water, so to say, and to see, what the interest is to comment on this piece of legislation. And then, honourable members, we will probably also have to just give an indication to Ms. Nikkerk as to a due date for such comments. We've seen that initially the department allowed 2 months, and then it had to be extended for a further month in its draft form. We are going into a recess from the end of, no, sorry, not a recess, a constituency period from the end of next week. So I think there may be quite a few weeks available to us for the public to submit their comments, for Ms. Nikkerk to be able to publish the advertisements, etc. And then still, once she's received the responses, being able to summarize that as she's done so ably in the past. Ms. Nikkerk, would you, having had the opportunity to look at the parliamentary program, have you got a proposed due date for such comments that you would like to share with us?
Thank you, Chairperson. Ultimately, that is the committee's decision. However, with our supply chain management processes, we could probably get the advertisement into the paper by next weekend, that is the end of June. In the past, I can tell you that we've allowed approximately 4 weeks on certain bills for comments. Taking the constituency period into account, I think it starts on the 28th of June, which is next week Friday, and ends on the 13th of August. So there's quite a bit of time in order to allow the public sufficient time, and not just sufficient time to make input, but also to make meaningful input on the bill. But ultimately, the committee needs to decide on how long it wants the ad to run. Thank you. Chair, you are
Thank you
mute.
very much. Can I just ask Ms. Niekerk if I could propose, honourable members, a due date of Friday the 30th of July. That is about 6 weeks from now, but as Ms. Niekerk has said, that it might take a week and a half to publish the advertisements, which would then leave the members of the public about a month to comment. Would that be fine, Ms. Niekerk, or would you need, or don't you need that much time from the end of July to be able to summarize the comments received?
Chair, that time frame is doable for me. Thank you.
Good. Honourable members, I then propose that we set the due date for the advertisements as the 30th, Friday the 30th of July. And can I just get an indication if there are any other proposals? If not, then I would accept that this is duly carried. Going once, going twice. Good. Thank you very much for that then, honourable members. Ms. Niekerk, do you need anything in addition to this in terms of the advertisement and the public participation process at this stage?
Nothing at this stage, Chairperson. Thank you.
Good. No, thank you very much then. Then, honourable members, we can continue to our next agenda point. Ms. Niekerk, would you be able to present to us the draft committee minutes of the 1st of June and thereafter the 8th of June? Good. Ms. Niekerk, perhaps we can just quickly see if we've got enough members online that would be able to approve of the first. I think Honourable Maran may have left us, so it's only myself and Honourable Maseko that were present in that meeting and can therefore attest to whether this is an accurate version of our proceedings. I recognize the hand of Honourable Maseko.
Chair, I think and I know that that is the correct version of the proceedings, so I propose that we adopt, Chair.
Good, thank you, Honourable Maseko, and I've been able to peruse the minutes as well, so I will add my support to that. The minutes are therefore accepted, adopted. Then, Ms. Niekerk, the 8th of June, that is our meeting of last week. If you could start with page 1 there. Thank you very much. Again, it was myself and Honourable Maseko. Sorry, Ms. Niekerk, if you could just go back, because I think some members would just like to know whether they would be able to also add to the approval process. Again, I think it's only myself and Honourable Maseko.
Chair, everything is perfect, so I propose that we adopt.
Good, thank you very much, and I support that motion so that those minutes are also then adopted. Thank you very much. Then, honourable members, Ms. Niekerk also circulated the draft committee report on the oversight visit to the Brandvlei Dam project on the 7th of May, Ms. Nikak, you may have to just assist me in this regard. That day we actually had a meeting, and then we had the oversight visit. The visit obviously was not an official meeting, and unfortunately it was only myself and Honorable Maran that attended the visit physically there at the dam. And perhaps you must just advise me as to whether we would be able to accept this report. Probably we just accept it for the record. I don't know if we really need to adopt the report. Again, I think only one member's support is enough also to adopt a set of documents for this committee. Perhaps you can just advise.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes, in fact, this report needs to be adopted by this committee. Members, however, need not to have been present at the actual engagement in order to adopt it, and one member of the committee may certainly adopt it. So these minutes may be adopted if you so wish. Thank you.
Good. So I propose that it be adopted then. Thank you very much. Thank you. And with no other comments on that, it's then duly adopted. Thank you. Honourable members, Ms. Nikak, if you could just advise us, we've now heard at the beginning of this meeting that there has been a slight delay from the NCOP for us to deal with the environmental laws. If you could just give us an indication of how you see the process going forward. I believe you have now received and circulated the latest from the NCOP.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. The minutes of the 1st and 8th of June, the Select Committee's minutes were circulated to members. And as Unati informed the committee earlier, there were proposed amendments from other provinces that were agreed to at the Select Committee. That would then mean that the Select Committee, together with their legal advisors, would have to now draft a list of amendments. If members would remember, the bill before the committee was a B version of the bill. They would now draft the list of the amendments which they've agreed to, which will be a C version of the bill. And then the bill before the committee, in order for the committee to do its final mandate, would then be a D version of the bill. And that bill is only scheduled to get to provinces by the middle of August. So the earliest this committee would be able to deal with a final mandate on the National Forest Amendment Bill, the D version of the bill, would be towards the end of August. Thank you, Chairperson.
Good. Thank you very much for that briefing. So, honourable members, as you can hear, it's not envisaged that we will have to meet during the constituency period. At this point in time, we just trust that this will be the final position on that. So hopefully we would be able to schedule it during our next term of the committee. Good. Then, in terms of us going forward, honourable members, I do see that on Friday, the 25th of June, the Public Accounts Committee will be meeting, and they will be briefed by the Auditor General of South Africa, the Department of Agriculture, and CASIDRA. And obviously, you know that this committee is not only responsible for environmental affairs and development planning, but also for the Department of Agriculture. So I think that may be of interest to a number of members if you would like to attend that meeting of the Provincial SCOPA as well. Good. Ms. Nikak, is there anything else that you believe we should be considering or that we should note before this meeting is adjourned?
Nothing from my side, Chairperson. Thank you.
And thank you very much, honourable members. I believe I don't see any hands. it's appropriate for me then to say thank you very much. Thank you for your hard work during this parliamentary term. Thank you to all that have supported us in our work, from our legal advisors, the ICT staff. But I think you will forgive me if I have a special word of thanks to our procedural officer, Mr. Shireen Nikak, who behind the scenes have really done a lot of work to ensure the smooth functioning of this committee. And with that, honourable members, I adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you all back after the constituency period. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Goodbye, members.
Thank you, Chair. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chair. Keep safe.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Right, Chair. Thank you very much.